You checked your account and the number was down. Maybe $50, maybe a few hundred. Maybe it was your investment portfolio after a rough week in the market. Maybe it was your savings after an unexpected bill arrived. Maybe it was just a charge you forgot about. The number was lower than it was yesterday, and something happened in your chest. Not a big reaction, not a crisis, just a small, sharp, unpleasant feeling. A tightening, a mild but real sense of something being wrong. Now think about the last time your account was up by the same amount. You probably felt good. Briefly. Then you moved on. You did not feel the same intensity in reverse. The gain did not produce a high that matched the low from the loss. The numbers were equal, but the feelings were not. That asymmetry has a name, and it is not a character flaw. It is not a sign that you are bad with money or overly anxious or irrational. It is one of the most thoroughly documented patterns in all of human psychology. And once you understand why it exists, you will start to see how it shapes almost every financial decision you make. The pattern is called loss aversion, and the research behind it changed how economists, marketers, governments, and financial institutions think about human behavior. Here is the core finding. Losing a sum of money causes roughly twice the psychological pain of the pleasure produced by gaining the same amount. The math of the transaction is identical. You are $50 richer or $50 poorer. But your brain does not process those two outcomes equally. The loss hits harder. It lingers longer. It motivates action in ways that an equivalent gain simply does not. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky spent years documenting this pattern through a series of careful experiments. Kahneman, a psychologist who was awarded the Nobel Prize in economics in 2002, and Tversky, his longtime research partner, developed what they called prospect theory. Prospect theory is a detailed model of how people actually evaluate outcomes involving risk and uncertainty, as opposed to how economic theory assumed they would. The classical economic model assumed that people weigh gains and losses symmetrically, that a rational person deciding whether to accept a bet would treat a potential gain of $100 and a potential loss of $100 as mirror images of each other. If the odds were even, a rational actor should be indifferent. But that is not what Kahneman and Tversky found when they asked real people to make real decisions. Real people demanded that a potential gain be significantly larger than a potential loss before they would consider a bet worth taking. On average, people needed to be offered roughly twice as much in potential gain to offset the prospect of losing a given amount. The pain of losing was simply more motivating than the pleasure of gaining. This is not a small quirk. It rewires the logic of financial decision-making at its foundation. Think about what happens when people hold on to losing investments. A stock drops 20%. Every rational piece of information available suggests the investment is underperforming and the money might be better deployed elsewhere. But selling the stock would make the loss real. It would transform an abstract number on a screen into an actual realized loss. And something in the brain resists that. Holding the position keeps the loss theoretical. Selling makes it permanent. So people hold, and the position sometimes continues to fall while they wait for the recovery that would allow them to sell without feeling the full pain of having been wrong. Richard Thaler, the behavioral economist who won the Nobel Prize in 2017, identified a specific version of this pattern in financial markets. Investors show a consistent tendency to sell winning investments too early while holding on to losing investments too long. Thaler called this the disposition effect. The name describes something precise. Investors are disposed to dispose of winners and hold on to losers, when by most measures the rational behavior would be the opposite. They lock in gains quickly because gains feel good now. They hold losses because selling would make them feel bad now. The emotional accounting of the present moment overrides the financial logic of the longer term. Loss aversion does not only show up in investing. It shows up in salary negotiation. Most people find it significantly easier to justify asking for more money when they frame the conversation around what they deserve than when they think about it as a negotiation. But studies of negotiation behavior consistently show that people become far more motivated and persistent when they frame a negotiation around avoiding a loss rather than gaining something new. A candidate who walks into a negotiation thinking, "I risk losing thousands of dollars per year if I do not push back on this offer," is more likely to negotiate successfully than someone thinking, "I might gain some extra money if I ask." Loss aversion drives the framing, and companies know this. The marketing and advertising world has understood loss aversion for decades. When an advertisement tells you that you could be missing out, it is not using the language of gain. It is using the language of loss. You are not gaining a product. You are losing something by not having it. When a subscription service frames its offer as "do not lose your current pricing," it is activating loss aversion. When a retailer tells you only 3 left in stock, it is not describing a sale. It is describing the risk of losing access. The feeling it produces in your body is not excitement. It is a mild version of the same tightening you felt when your account number dropped. Dan Ariely, a behavioral economist who has spent years studying irrational decision-making, found in his research that people routinely make worse decisions when they are evaluating options through the lens of potential loss. Ariely found that the mere framing of a choice as avoiding a bad outcome rather than achieving a good one changes the actual decision people make, even when the underlying math is identical. The same product, the same price, a different frame, a different choice. This is how modern financial systems and consumer environments exploit an ancient mechanism. Here is the counterintuitive part. Loss aversion is not a bug. It is the output of a system that worked extremely well for most of human history. Think about what losing a resource meant before modern economies existed. If you were living in a world where food was scarce and unpredictable, losing half your stored food was not equivalent to failing to gain extra food. Losing what you had could mean not surviving. The calculus was not symmetric because the stakes were not symmetric. Being wrong about a potential gain cost you an opportunity. Being wrong about a potential loss could cost you everything. A brain wired to weight losses more heavily than gains was a brain that survived. That brain is still the one you are using today. It did not update its wiring when financial markets, subscription services, and investment accounts became the environment. It still treats a drop in your portfolio number with the same underlying urgency it would have applied to watching your food supply shrink. The magnitude of the reaction is calibrated for a world that no longer exists. And modern financial environments have been designed, in many cases deliberately, to activate that reaction at scale. Consider how market news is covered. A single day of falling prices receives dramatically more emotional language and more sustained coverage than an equivalent day of rising prices. This is partly because loss aversion is true of audiences as well as investors. Content that activates loss aversion gets more attention, generates more clicks, and keeps people more engaged than content about equivalent gains. The media environment around financial markets is structurally tuned to activate the loss side of your brain. Consider how insurance products are sold. Most insurance is rationally optional for most people in most situations, but the framing of insurance is almost universally built around loss. Not what you gain by having a policy, but what you stand to lose without one. The fear of losing your home, your health, your car, your income activates loss aversion powerfully enough to make people pay significantly for protection against risks that are statistically quite small. One common pattern in the research is that people systematically overestimate the likelihood of losses and underestimate the probability of gains, which means they often pay a premium for peace of mind that the underlying math does not fully justify. None of this means insurance is bad or that investing is irrational. The point is not what you should do with any specific financial product. The point is that your emotional reaction to potential losses is being used as a tool by advertisers, by financial institutions, by market coverage, by any system that benefits from keeping your loss aversion activated. The practical reflection here is not about overriding your emotions or becoming a purely rational financial actor. That goal is neither realistic nor particularly useful. Loss aversion is not going away, but awareness of it changes how you can relate to it. When you feel that tightening in your chest because a number dropped, that feeling is real. It is also disproportionate. The mechanism is ancient and it is running in a modern context it was not designed for. One way to think about it is to ask whether the loss in front of you is actually the kind of loss that the feeling is calibrated for. Is this a threat to your survival, or is it a number on a screen that your nervous system is treating like one? When you notice yourself holding on to something past the point of reason, or avoiding a negotiation, or responding to an advertisement that frames everything as what you might lose, that is loss aversion at work. Naming it does not eliminate it, but it creates a small pause. And in that pause, a slightly different question becomes possible. Not just how much does this loss hurt, but what is that hurt actually telling me? You checked your account and the number was down. The tightening you felt was real. It was also twice as strong as the feeling you would have had if the number had been up by the same amount. And now you know why.